Hi everyone, I'm Steve again. I'm pleased to introduce our next Fireside Chat of the day, which will be a conversation about women on the path to leadership. Our featured speaker is Joanna Price. She is the Coca-Cola Company's Senior Vice President, and she's in charge of a bunch of things there, including public affairs, communications, and sustainability at the Coca-Cola Company. Now, From Day One has a special relationship with Coca-Cola. It fuels a lot of our energy and refreshment. One of our co-founders has like 8 cases of Coke Zero in our office, stacked up, ready for any event. And I like a little bit of Coca-Cola in the morning. Like, I'm an honorary Southerner, even though I'm a Northerner. So I'm filling in here so while people come back in a little bit, but that's all true. So our speaker has led initiatives drawing on her extensive issues management experience, stakeholder mapping, that's important these days, and engagement skills. In recent years, Joanna has led public affairs work for the company on corporate reputation, category growth, and sustainability priorities. One of her proudest achievements has been helping to launch Coca-Cola's industry-first goal to collect and recycle the equivalent of every bottle or can the company sells globally by 2030. And by the way, this is a first for us. We have an assortment of products out here for you as conversation starters. Besides advising Coca-Cola's C-level execs and its board of directors on important issues, Joanna does extensive community work with groups that include the Girl Scouts, the Atlanta Women's Foundation, the International Dyslexia Foundation, and the good old YWCA. Interviewing Joanna will be Nicole Smith. She's the editorial audience director at Harvard Business Review. She and her team create strategies to sustain, build, and find new digital readership and audiences. Before going to HBR, Nicole was the arts and entertainment editor for the hometown paper, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She's also held social media strategy roles for Essence Magazine, Bounce TV, and she was a video journalist at CNN. So please welcome Joanna and Nicole to the stage.
Hi. All right. So I'm just going to make sure that they told me not to sit on my mic, so I'm going to try to, if you guys hear some rustling, let me know. So like we said, my name's Nicole. We have Joanna here. I just want to take a deep breath because I feel like we've just gotten maybe a little bit on the other side of the pandemic. What do you say?
I think we're sort of through the other side, but I think if we've learned anything, we're not too sure what's coming next.
Yeah. But I feel like we've also had the opportunity to learn some lessons, right?
Agreed.
Have you learned some lessons, Joanna? Just if you think about it personally and professionally, what have you learned during the pandemic?
So I think that we've all learned a lot. I think for me, personally, professionally, they're kind of probably blended in together, which I think is kind of what we've learned through the pandemic, that there was a lot of blending of the personal and the professional. I think for me, the lessons that I've learned is to actually be really clear about what makes me happy and what fuels me, so that I can always show up and be my best self. And I think part of that was, I think what I learned going through the pandemic was that I found myself starting to be a champion, not just for myself, but my team and my colleagues, and really being clear about where people are at from their emotional, physical, and mental well-being, because I think that's what really took a toll on people.
But isn't that exhausting? I mean, can I get a raise of hands of folks just trying to be empathetic all the time, trying to be considerate all the time? You as a leader, does that tug on you so much that it exhausts you?
Great question, Nicole. I think, so yes and no. So one of the things that I really learned coming through the pandemic is, and whenever I say this to people, particularly the role that I have, they're surprised. I am an introvert, but my job requires me to be an extrovert. Mm-hmm. And I knew this about myself, but going through the pandemic really honed it in on me is I need my space. And that was a little bit where I opened around learning what really fuels you. So what fuels me is thinking space or time on my own or walking, for example. And so that ensures that whenever you're having to give, you are always present and you're always in the moment. But also knowing if someone's coming to you and they're asking for help or they're coming to ask you for advice, if you can't be present and you can't be your best self, is to even just say to them, just not right now. I can come back to you, but I can't do this right now.
So
I
it's
need to
okay
do
to say
something.
that?
I think it is absolutely okay to say that.
Well, the pandemic, I mean, it's changed our world so much. How has it changed the workforce at Coca-Cola? That's a big question.
That's a big question. Yeah. So, I mean, it was interesting. I would say to you, probably about 5 years ago, we had started the move to flex working, but it was a move.
Okay.
The pandemic accelerated it. We were really good about starting to be very clear about providing all our people with all the digital tools that allowed them to be flexible. We obviously had to accelerate some things that were unexpected because the pandemic hit so fast and hard. Mm-hmm. But Coke's a big believer in flexible workforce. Now, if you also think about it, I think that because we're so global.
That's an understatement for Coke.
But because you're also dealing with people all around the world, and we're very deliberate about sort of making sure that we have global networks and the work gets done wherever the work gets done around the world, that also helped us with a mindset around flexibility even to start off with. I think what also happened was in the acceleration to the flex working was also the recognition of just what everybody is dealing with at home and giving them a lot more flexibility personally and professionally, because we're dealing with either aged parents or childcare or children in and out of school and all of the bits and pieces. And that flexibility gave them the ability to navigate and manage that.
So what do you value now, perhaps that you didn't value before the pandemic?
Believe it or not, actually time in the office with people.
Really?
So just going back and actually seeing people physically collaborating, those corridor conversations, the speed at which things can happen in the office, that I've missed. But I think for me, I love being at home and working from home, and I like being in the office, and the ability to do both is really powerful. And I think in the past, from a Coke perspective, we would have been more of a mindset about, so tell me why you need to work from home. And we're almost shifting more to be, so tell me why you need to be in the office. Because we were talking earlier, there's no point coming into the office if you're the only person there. You might as well have stayed at home and been on Zoom or Teams,
yes,
whatever you were using. But the idea of coming into the office and being with others and being deliberate about why are you coming into the office.
So you're a leader in your space, you're a leader at your organization. Do you think you're able to communicate the why to your workforce? How do I communicate that? How do you get people on the same page as you?
So a couple of different things. So at Coke, we talk a lot about coming into the office to collaborate, celebrate, connect. Okay. So we're really clear about the why that you're coming in. But then there are also little things that you can do as a leader. And I'll share an example in a moment. And I didn't quite realize the ripple effect that it had. But because we'd restarted traveling all the time, I was sending a note on like a Monday morning or a Sunday night just to my direct reports. This is where I'll be this week, just so they knew if I was going to be out of pocket, I was going to be interstate, whatever was sort of going on, and what days I was in the office. And then what I found was that they were starting to come into the office on the days that I was in the office. They were also sending the same message to their teams to say they were going to be in the office on these days, and more of us started to come into the office. So there was a ripple effect kind of happened, and I think it comes back to what I said earlier. You don't really want to go into the office and sit there if there's nobody else there.
Yeah.
But if you know actually that other people are going to be there, and at the end of the day, potentially face time with more senior leaders, there's a reason to come into the office.
Mm-hmm. So before we get into my next question, let me just ask you said that word collaborate.
Yep.
Do I need to be in person with another person to successfully collaborate?
No, you don't. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting. One of the things that we've also learned is being a lot smarter about what that collaboration, because I have people right across the US and Canada, and
I mean, you have a big purview. So you cannot be at all places all the time.
I can't be in all
But I would
places.
imagine that your job still requires you collaborate.
It absolutely does. But even little things, like even if there are 6 of you in the office and there are 3 of you on the Teams virtual, we've even learnt to just, even though we might be using the room conferencing, we've still opened all our screens up so that our cameras, so the people who are virtual are still getting to see all the one-on-one images. They don't feel like they're three people completely divorced from a conversation that's going on in the room.
And if you don't have that, what if we're not Coke? You don't have that big tech. What would your recommendation be for a small or medium-sized business to stay in touch, to make sure that you have the pulse on your workforce?
So, really good question. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that virtual, whether it's Zoom and Teams, it has become so ubiquitous in terms of the way that we're working and connecting. And the other thing too is, I still do a lot of my one-on-ones through Teams. Like, you talk to them. The other one is
Talking.
It's talking. It's going and asking people. It's asking questions. How are they? What's going on? Getting a sense of, and even just one of the nicest things about the video conferencing versus the telephone calls, and I'll come back to like telephone calls in a moment, is pay attention to people's facial expressions. Because it's no different to what you and I are doing just here. It's through a screen, but I can still see if someone's worried or something's going on to ask if everything's okay. But then there's also, this happened to us for me through the pandemic. I actually got huge video fatigue. I was like, oh my God, I literally wake up, and I feel for those people who work all the time from home, because within 5 minutes, you're at work and you're on, and you suddenly get to the middle of the day and you're like, I actually haven't got up and moved. At least in the office, I'm more likely to move. But I started to get really deliberate about my calls through the day, my video conferences, and I would say to the people I was on, this call, by the way, I'm actually going out and I'm going to walk for the entire call, so I apologise for the lawnmowers and the dogs barking or whatever's going on, but we can do this as a telephone call.
Right, I like that. So everyone saw the title here. We're talking about leadership, so I want to ask you a question that has gone back and forth. I feel like this pendulum has gone back and forth. Some people say leaders are made, right? Other people argue leaders are born. How many people think leaders are born here? You're born a leader. How many people think you can be made? I saw you kind of, you can make a leader. What do you think, Joanna?
It's a great question. I think that for leadership as a skill, it has to be nurtured, it has to be learnt, and you have to practice it. Like it's not something that you can go to one class and go, I'm a leader. It's also not something to go, I'm an inherent good leader and be done with it. I almost look at it like an exercise program or a muscle. It's a muscle that you've got to continually exercise, you've got to continually feed it, you've got to continually stretch it and push it and continually get better.
But we're born with muscles. So
we are born, but we're not all born as athletes, or we're not all born to be able to shoot a basketball. We're not all born to be able to hit a ball. We learn those skills.
Okay. So when did you realize you were a leader? I see a deep pause.
No, I think that it probably was at the point in time where I was in a room or a situation, somewhere where there are other people around, and they began to take note of what I was actually saying. Like the words I was saying was having an impact.
Okay. So it sounds like leadership means to you influence?
Yes.
What else does it mean to you? What does good leadership look like?
What does good leadership look like? Good leadership, I think one of the best skills of good leadership is someone who can listen. I think it's someone who is self-aware, and that is really important. I also think it's someone who's inherently curious, who asks questions, I think it's someone who doesn't need to always be the one who's out in front, doesn't need to be the one who shines. I think that it's someone, and this comes into the self-awareness, I think it's someone who's self-aware enough to be able to circle themselves with smarter, brighter, better people.
And not be intimidated by it.
And not be intimidated by it.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, but you're a woman.
I did take note of that this morning.
A woman leader. And my hypothesis, I don't know if the ladies feel the same way, is that women have something special about them that can make them good leaders. And do you agree with that? And if so, what are some of the skills that you think women possess, or assets women possess, that you think that just inherently makes them good at leadership?
So look, I'm a huge fan of diversity, because I actually think that it's really important, and diversity and diverse thought and diverse experiences come in a lot of different ways. And so diversity around a table in any situation is really important. For women in particular, I think that women come to the table with just different life experiences, different, we're wired differently, we think differently, we problem solve differently, we ask different questions.
So how does that help a business then?
Because corporate, particularly, I think if we've learned anything through the pandemic, the issues that businesses are facing today are on a scale of complexity that we've not seen for quite some time, and we also don't really know what is the next pendulum to drop, what's coming next kind of thing. So corporations are having to deal with really complex problems, and so having women at the table who are going to problem solve in a different way, ask a different set of questions, may lead corporations to a different solution that they hadn't thought of before.
And so even beyond women in leadership, I feel like you made the case. I want to talk about global leadership as well. So you're not from Atlanta. Where are you from?
As I like to say to everybody, so I've been in Atlanta, Georgia for the last 8.5 years. I like to say to people, I'm more southern than you all. I'm from a long way south. So Australia originally.
Oh, beautiful.
So I've had as we were just talking before, I've worked for Coke for about 20 years. Just this August I will hit 20 years. And I've had the privilege of working in a lot of different locations with Coke.
Like where?
So I've worked Sydney for 2 stints in Australia, Hong Kong, Shanghai. I did a global role out of Atlanta, and then the last 3.5 years leading North America. So a lot of my forming years as a leader have logically happened in Coke. Coke's a great training ground from, you talked about, I've had the ability to go and have global experience. I've had amazing leaders, mentors, advocates, sponsors. Coke have put me through great programs. Coke are really serious about leadership, but also women in leadership. For example, we have an aspiration to be 50% female leadership by 2030. That's
a big aspiration.
It's a big aspiration, and we've got a way to go. We're currently sitting at 44% of our population globally is women, 38% are in leadership positions. But as an example, my new boss, who came into the role on the 1st of January, which is the president of North America.
This January?
This January, for the first time, we have a female leader of our biggest operating group in the company. And almost half her leadership of her leadership team are women.
So I'm going to ask you, you're a global leader at this point. What's maybe one skill or one thing people need to think about if they want to aspire to lead a global enterprise?
Yeah. Global experience is critical. I think one of the biggest advantages of global experience, and it ties very much into your leadership experience, and we talked earlier about what do I see as the traits of a good leader, is when you go and work in a global corporation, when you go and live and work in another country, all your norms, all your go-tos aren't going to necessarily work. So you very much have to be that type of leader who is curious, who's going to ask a lot of questions, ask different points of views, because your norms, what you would default to, could be very wrong. And so you're in a situation where you're going to be uncomfortable, everything's new. They're really important skills.
So it sounds like you need to be willing to change.
Yes.
So my question is, for those who struggle with change, and I think if we were all honest, at some point some change has made us feel uncomfortable and we didn't know what to do. What's your advice for someone who struggles with change or just has a fear of change, a lot or a little?
Yeah. It's hard. I think whether we like it or not, a change is always going to be a part of our future. And I also, I look at change as an opportunity you could either do a reset, you could learn a new skill, you might get a chance to work in a different part of the business or something new. It's a chance you may want to kind of reskill or reform up in a different way.
Yeah. You once told me operate in the gray.
Yes.
Yeah. What did you mean by that?
So, as they introduced, So I lead public affairs, which is like government relations, public policy. I lead communications, internal, external, and I lead sustainability. I also lead all our community engagement work. And I don't have the luxury of like hard sales targets. I don't have the luxury of like a design that I'm building that, you know, so I permanently operate in the grey, because for a lot of what I do, there is not necessarily a hard and fast right or wrong answer. It's how do I find that best path forward that's going to be the right thing for the business. You know, if you think about, like, I've been in this role for the US since 2019, and with everything that has gone on in the US, and, you know, I often talk to people about, you have an Australian responsible for government relations in the US, but it actually gives me an advantage. I don't have any inherent biases. I'm inherently curious. I ask lots of questions. I have great experts around me. And I often have to say to them when I'm questioning what's going on, I'm not questioning your capability. So I'm questioning to seek to understand, because I want to know if there's a different way forward that we haven't thought of before.
So it's okay to ask questions.
It's absolutely okay to ask questions.
Beautiful. So what's a change that you've experienced recently or even in the far past that's made you a better leader?
There's one that, this happened very early on in my career. We'd had a series of issues that we had worked through. We navigated them, everything was really good, and I was rebuilding a lot of the relationships that we'd harmed on the way through with some different things that we'd done. And the business had made a decision that they wanted to go down a particular path, and I'd been asked to go and get points of view, opinion, that sort of thing, and I brought it back into the business and basically said, I wouldn't do this and here are all the reasons why, kind of thing. And the decision was made that they were going to go ahead at that point with this particular decision to launch a particular product. And I remember going home that night and talking to my husband about it all and sitting there, and we were running through it all, and I was struggling with what I was so uncomfortable about. And so I was running it through with him, and what it really came down to was I had actually felt like I had hit a point in my career where my values and what I believed and what I stood into, I felt was about to be undermined. And so I actually went into the office the next day and said to my boss, this is actually how I feel, this is what I'm concerned about, and I think that and I've cleaned up a whole lot of things for you, but I think if you do this, this is a step too far for me to be able to fix. And we decided not to launch it.
I'm so proud of you for standing in your beliefs and being your authentic self.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today, Joanna. If we could just give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you all.
Thank you all for the time and listening. Thank you.